All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nick Dinsmore. I'm super excited to welcome everybody to episode 4 of Beer and Broadband. And it's Beer and Broadband for a reason, because we have beer and we're going to talk broadband. So we will kick it off right away and turn it over to the host and CEO of Bonfire Engineering and Construction, Mr. Brian Hollister, to take it away.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited about this next episode and our topic for today of open access. Open access has different meanings to different people, so we're gonna conquer that today. Talk about those different meanings, the different benefits of open access, and we've obviously got a great cast of panelists with us today. We've got Greg Wheeling. Greg is the owner of Graywall Advisors. Thank you, Greg. We've got Jeff Christensen. He's the president of Entry Point Networks. Would you raise your hand there? All right. And then we've got Nate Wolowitz. And Nate, he has the longest title of everybody as the Regional Broadband Director of Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. So what we typically do right now, though, is just take a moment to go around with each person and let you do a bit of an intro so obviously the audience can learn a little bit more about you. But as Nick said, I am Brian Hollister, and I'm the CEO and owner of Bonfire Engineering and Construction. And, Bonfire's, why we're in existence is we're really focused on helping to make sure that all Americans can get broadband access. We really believe that it should be really a basic right. And obviously it helps drive economic health and the vitality of communities, right? And it helps to improve education, makes healthcare more accessible. And of course, now a huge topic is naturally making sure kids can get access to education. So we're focused on helping to close that divide that's out there by helping to do things like this, right? Bring information to the community to help inform, help educate. So that's kind of our quest in life, and it's a super exciting one, and it's even more exciting these days with the pandemic and things that are happening. While that's a negative, it's a good thing in the essence of bringing the awareness, obviously, to broadband and the disconnect that so many Americans unfortunately have. So hopefully today we can talk about some more options of how we can bring communities, service providers together to come up with more creative solutions to help close this digital divide. So with that being said, why don't we just kind of move from left to right, if you're on my same left to right, and do an intro with each one of you folks. Nate, do you mind kicking it off?
Sure, thanks, Brian, and good to be here. I'm Nate Wolowitz. I got my career start in telecom, helping to manage some of the largest and monitor some of the largest worldwide data networks for folks in the brokerage industry, the banking industry, the telecom industry, airlines, railroads, you name it. If they had a data network, they needed to have it managed. And from there, I went on to do a stint with Southwestern Bell, just thus the odd shape of my head. While I was at Southwestern Bell, I was the head of wireless data services for Washington, Baltimore, and while I was there, I developed the first white label broadband product. Well, it was internet back then; it wasn't broadband. That any cell phone provider had ever done. It was called Internet by Cellular One, and it was a great product. It took off amazingly well. I then finally figured out that Colorado was the place to be. So I ended up out here, and I'm with the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. I provide technical support and technical assistance to communities who are trying to improve their broadband and cellular access in their communities. And I'm also the father and creator of Project Thor, our open access regional broadband network. We've aggregated 1,879 plus miles of fiber connections to connect communities together in a resilient, affordable, accessible way so that a couple of fiber cuts or a couple of circuits going down won't cut our communities off, which is something they experienced before. And we try to bring as many providers along with us so that people have selection when it comes to middle mile, and we won't cut anybody out. Anybody who wants to connect to our network, service provider, government agencies, local organizations, we'll bring them all on, because the internet is an awfully big ecosystem, and in small communities where some of the communities that I work with are only a couple of thousand to 5,000 people. Even one organization not being connected can have a large impact on these communities.
And as I told Nate in the very beginning, that clearly, if you're a Marvel fan, one of the best project names ever, because he's putting the hammer down on broadband with Project Thor. So very nice. All right, Greg.
Yes. We had a downpour, so if it's loud, let me know. Close the windows. Anyway, it's Greg Whalen with Greg Whalen Advisors. I'm out of the Boston area, just south of New Hampshire. Coast is, the ocean's like 2 miles that way. I've been involved in broadband for a long time. I don't want to tell how many years. I actually did the first ADSL chipset in the world that worked back in the day. So I sort of grew up, I did chips. I was a product manager for D-Slam, which is a big honking piece of carrier metal. And then I was at a large equipment company, basically marketing entire portfolio to large service providers in the world, with the broadband all the way to the end, to the core. So I was one of the founders of the Broadband Forum. Again, been in the industry a long time. Got involved with open access quite a long time ago because of Jeff Christensen. I was working on a project, and Jeff and I happened to cross paths. Was enamored with the architecture because it just made a lot of sense, right? I do come from the tech side, but I also look at, to me, there's three architectures. There's a business architecture and a financial architecture. And no matter how hard I try to beat on the open access model, it wouldn't break. And so that's why I try to raise a large sum of money to build some in the US with private money. I wasn't too keen on the municipalities for a number of reasons. Ran into my own set of challenges trying to look at the private equity side, which 5 years ago I knew nothing about, I would say. So anyway, that's who I am. I help anyone in the ecosystem who is eager to implement open access networks. Private
Awesome.
or public, doesn't matter.
And let's round out our panel introductions with Jeff.
Great, thank you. Yes, Greg and I, it's probably rounding 4 to 5 years since Greg and I have been talking about this stuff and working on this stuff. And Greg's a great head. He really understands the issues. And so Entry Point is, in its roots, Entry Point is a software company. And our definition of open access, we'll probably get into this later, so I won't jump into that, but I think we define open access a little differently than others may. There's 6 founders at Entry Point. The founder that brought us all together built the first ISP in Eastern Idaho. And when he did that, the local incumbent telephone company, which was CenturyLink Quest at the time, they were not excited about having a competitor, and they basically cut off his middle mile path. And that's what sent him down a road of trying to figure out how do we, what are the root problems here with the current system, and how do we help consumers work around those problems? And so, after thinking about the problem and working on it, he really arrived at what Entry Point is all about. I think we're the first in the world that took software-defined networking technologies and applied them to the open access problem. I haven't seen any data to counter that yet. Here we are in the US.
So, it's a good claim.
Yeah.
Go, Jeff.
Did you have a question, Brian? Sorry.
No, my bad.
So anyway, that's really what our focus has been applying what I'm going to call data center technologies to the open access model.
Okay.
And that includes SDN, automation, virtualization. Those are the three I would focus on.
Okay.
And Greg quickly became kind of a kindred spirit in agreeing on, as we talked through the problem and brainstormed together, I think we sort of were pointed the same direction on root problems and solutions.
Let's, given that, make sure, does everybody have a beer in hand? Because this is, again, Beer and Broadband. So at least you have something you're drinking that tastes good. We typically on these episodes, we do a beer check before we really go deep. So just run around. I'm drinking a Stella right now. So Brian, what do you got?
I'm drinking El Goose, a German-style sour ale. I've never had it, so we'll see how this goes.
From Avery Brewing Company, I think, right?
Avery.
Yeah.
And then I've got backup of a Tangerine Express IPA. And if all of that goes to hell, there's always Coors Light.
You are ready, Brian.
All right, Nate,
gentlemen.
Nate, what you got?
And I'm drinking a Colorado Native Amber.
Nice.
It was the first thing I grabbed out of the fridge. We tend to go camping and we kind of pick up beers along the way, and so usually the first stop as we're pulling into a town is to a local liquor store to see what's local. So unfortunately, that's what's local here for me right now.
Greg, what do you got?
Where is here, Nate? Where are you?
I'm in Evergreen.
Sparkling water. It wasn't prepared. It was caught off guard.
I'm going to let you down too. I've got water, and it's not even Colorado water. It's the other side of the Rockies, Utah water.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on. That's okay. All right. Well, Brian and Brian and Nate and I'll try to make up for the rest of you guys. So
the Colorado team will have to represent.
Colorado, go beer. All right. So let's jump into it. This obviously episode 4 is around open access, and Greg obviously has written several articles about open access. I think if you ask 10 people on the street or 10 people that are just in this industry what open access is, I think you may get at least 5 different answers. It's clearly more well known in Europe. But I think let's try to just, for the people that are going to be watching this later, let's define what it is. Like, let's be clear before we get into, I guess, real deep, like, what is open access? How do we define it in layman's terms? Either Greg or Jeff, either any of you guys are willing to jump in, but let's get a definition.
Jeff, why don't you provide like the simple one, and then I'll add a little complexity.
Okay. So, I think the traditional definition is that you have access to multiple ISPs. And I think that's really what came out of Europe, is that in Europe, they have separated largely the infrastructure and the services. And so the infrastructure is not controlled by the service provider. And as a consumer, you've got access to multiple ISPs. I would say entry points definition, and Greg will probably talk the same direction. Our definition is that you do separate the infrastructure and the services. That's fundamental. And then the service providers are exposed to competition and to innovation. That's our definition. But every service provider in the ecosystem is exposed to competition and to innovation. An innovative threat is really what they're exposed to. Greg, go for it.
Yeah, no, if I can elaborate on that. So you have and actually you can really slice it and dice it. We did a stack of what you could actually create in an open access environment. I came up with like 11 or 12 different layers. Because you can overlay network and cloud. If you look at it as a model where you're wholesaling everything, right? That's one model. And that includes conduit. There's a recent deal with conduit. It doesn't have to be fiber. It's just someone, as you guys know, the biggest expense is running the fiber or digging up the streets, right? Bar none. Or designing it and then building it, right? The tech side, where I come from, is like pennies compared to the heavy lifting of building it. So if you're going to build it everywhere for one thing, whether it's conduit or fiber. So you're separating, again, the network from the services, and the services at this time would be, internet access. Let's keep it simple, the heck, the triple play, right? Just internet access. But in between, you get conduit, wholesale conduit. You could do dark fiber, where the city or some entity, again, it could be a private entity, deploys dark fiber and wholesales it on a fiber by fiber basis. Or you could all wholesale lit fiber, which is where Jeff's technology comes in, and offer like what I call like VLANs or us, right? If you make it, it's a big honking Ethernet. The town is a big Ethernet network, and you offer VLANs or VPNs or some layer 2 tunnel protocol. So there's different layers within that, but the thing is the service providers, the retail-facing service providers are separated from owning the infrastructure. You have one infrastructure. You don't need 2 or 3 sets of routes. You need one, and then you wholesale it on a fair, equitable, and non-discriminatory basis to all.
So why do you think somebody, I guess, what's the why? Like, why? I mean, obviously we know, and Brian talked about, the purpose for Bonfire. And, when we talk about digital divide, it's actually, I would argue, it's becoming a digital chasm, not even a divide. But what's
there's an urban divide.
Huh?
Sorry to interrupt. No, there's an urban divide. Everyone thinks divide, they think rural. Yes, there is a huge rural divide, but there's also a divide in the cities.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, there is.
So what's the why behind, like, in that scenario? Let's talk through the business model of it, right? I mean, you talked about the architecture and the different elements of it and the different layers, but what's the model? I mean, we all know there's obviously people that build networks, there's people that design networks, there's people that run networks, there's people that have software that supports networks, but there's all these different pieces. What's the model for open access?
I mean, isn't the model, and I guess in my simple mind, is really thinking about, a water treatment company that is a municipal owned infrastructure. We live in Denver Water. So they own, water and pipes, obviously, to every single person's home. But what people choose to do with the water, the services they sell off of that water, that is not, Denver Water doesn't care about it, right? They just are owning this infrastructure, and they're allowing lots of innovation and lots of companies and people to use the water, right? So is this kind of similar, guys? I mean, does it help, I guess, a municipality that might have a broadband challenge, help them to get into broadband, put an infrastructure in place that they can understand, oh, this is like my water infrastructure. I'm going to just build this. I'm going to focus on the physical components, but I don't really know anything about an ISP. I don't even know what ISP means, right? Is it a way to step them into, I guess, a model that might make sense because they might be the funding party to be able to make that happen?
Just to keep the water metaphor, it's almost like the water is the internet access, right? Where the idea would be the town would own the water pipes, but you could buy water from different reservoirs. And somehow it wouldn't get mixed along the way, right? So that's sort of the metaphor. But the idea is the cities, when I first got into this, with Jeff and Am and Idaho, my reaction was, no way can a city do this. It's too complex, right? For the most people I know work in the cities, they're just not enterprise kind of, corporate America, gung-ho, profit-driven. So, but can they manage roads? Yes, they can. So, can they manage at least the conduit? Yes, they can. Can they manage dark fiber? Probably. Can they manage lit fiber? Yeah, maybe. But they can definitely do the dark. And if the thing is, as you well know, if who's going to do it, right? I mean, a large part of America has cable monopolies. I do, right? I'm selfish. I just want a better network. But I have a Comcast monopoly, and so a lot of companies do. So they're not going to do fiber to the home. They're not going to get me a gigabit anytime soon, cost effectively, because they don't have to. They got a monopoly. A lot of these towns, there's no one there, and so you got to map the business with the finances. Rural's a separate issue, but most suburbia and not too super rural, the model will work.
So let's actually, so let's break it up into two pieces. And I know Nate, I think you wanted to comment as well. So let's
Yeah,
I think there's the rural piece and the urban piece. So I think maybe you want to talk about the rural piece of it.
Yeah, I can certainly talk to the rural piece, but I agree. Even within the urban areas, there's still a divide, and it's caused by the lack of infrastructure paths, and that's really where the open access model it is really applicable, and it helps in the rural markets. When a municipality or an organization comes in and they build fiber in a community, because one of the largest expenses is actually putting fiber in the ground or hanging fiber on the poles and getting it from point A to point B. And when you have a very limited market size, you look at a service provider. How could a service provider affordably build to a community of 2,000 people or 5,000 people or even 10,000 people and businesses? It makes it really challenging. So by offering an open access model where, Brian, to leverage it's water pipes, it gives multiple providers access. And why open access? I'll go back a little bit. One of the reasons for open access is everybody has their preference of what they want. It's no different than I want to subscribe to Netflix. I want to subscribe to HBO Max. I want to subscribe to Disney. I want some other streaming feed. Just having that choice, at both in pricing and content, is part of that. And of course, you then have the other portion of, when you look at some community anchor institutions, like hospitals or cell phone providers who are also going to come onto the network, they have their own flavor. They want transport, or they want their own flavor, and they want, because of whatever corporate or organizational discount they've obtained, they want to be able to obtain that in every single one of the markets where they're present. So
I guess the question is, can open access work unless you're altruistic as a business and a community?
Well, there's over a couple, 4 or 5 billion with a B, already invested in open access networks in Europe. Yeah,
Europe's more altruistic than we are, I guess, right?
No, these are private equity funded. These are private equity funded networks. And trust me, my little experience with private equity, they're not there for charity. Okay. Just name a few. Reykjavik Fiber, 10 million. City Fiber's already gone through like 2 billion. Deutsche Glasfaser, whatever, if I pronounce that right, they're up to 2 billion. Cyro in Ireland, they're up to 500 million. These are private companies offering open access because they realized they separated the infrastructure. Think of conduit and fiber, that lasts 25 years, plus or minus, right? So you want to finance that. You want the finance to match your asset. Great. So fiber, long-term asset, super duper, I'll finance that long-term. My layer 2 Ethernet switch, that's going to last me 2 years if I'm lucky, right? So I don't want to finance that for, that's like equipment leasing kind of stuff. So why don't, if I separate the long-term stuff, which is infrastructure, from the electronic stuff, which is throwaway, so now I get economic benefits and I have a disaggregated architecture that works.
So let's talk about, so you gave a couple examples.
The thing is, I'm going to do the heavy lifting, but I'm not a venture capital unicorn, right? VC is like, I'm going to give 10 people 5 million, knowing 9 of them are going to blow it. But one of them is going to make me $1 billion, and I'm good. Where a large part of private equity, or part of private equity is used. It's like, here's $1 billion, make me 14% for 20 years.
So is there an example in the United States or North America that we can talk about that we've tried it here and it's worked, or let's use an example if it's tried it here and it didn't work?
I'll defer to Ammon and Jeff. That's a great model.
Yeah. So to briefly answer your why, and then I'll talk about Ammon. The problem is the monopoly. So they've got a monopoly both on the infrastructure and on the services. So you're breaking that up. It is a natural monopoly, the infrastructure, but the problem with the cable companies is that they're going to keep this 30, 40-year-old coaxial cable in the ground or on the poles as long as people let them. And people don't understand that fiber has 25,000 times more capacity than coaxial cable. So there's no question that fiber should be the base infrastructure. So we're being cheated both at the infrastructure layer, and then we're getting, if you want to get an answer to the question, go look at Spectrum's 5-year stock price, or go look at Cable One's 5-year stock price. And we're not saying, you know, I'm a private company and I'm in it to make money, but the returns they're getting are monopolistic returns. And it's because people don't have a choice. So to talk about the Ammon example. So Ammon is, the cost of connectivity report just came out of the Open Technology Institute out of DC. And we expected Ammon to be the lowest cost in the US in this report. It was actually the lowest cost of fiber in the world. So they, below Ammon.
Really?
You had Prague, Tokyo, Paris, Copenhagen. I mean, all of these big cities, you had to get below the top 10 to get to the US. So Ammon, Idaho is listed #1 lowest cost internet, fiber optic internet in the world. And that's because their symmetrical gig is $47. So anybody in Ammon, Idaho can get a symmetrical gig for $47.
That's a pretty good deal.
Now, how's that work for them, Jeff? Though, I mean, the model, I guess, because there's two pieces, right? There's then a component that obviously is the infrastructure, and then of course they choose the ISP. You're talking about the data component riding over the infrastructure as the lowest cost.
No. Total cost.
The whole thing. Okay.
Total cost, $47.
And how does the model work like in Ammon? Is the customer pay two different fees, one for the infrastructure, one for the ISP?
Yeah, we actually break it up into 3 categories. We break it up into infrastructure, ongoing maintenance and operations, and then they pay their ISP. So the reason Ammon is unique and why we've been able to drive the price down so low is people can switch their ISP on demand. So if you don't like your ISP, it literally takes 45 seconds to switch your ISP. And so there is a true marketplace. So let's just say your ISP goes down. So there's a problem at the ISP.
So what's the incentive for the, I guess, and we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have we had our service provider panelist couldn't make it today, but I mean, what's the value, what's the incentive if the customer is able to flip from provider to provider in that situation?
They can serve the town. So an ISP can serve the town of Ammon. It's very similar to an MDU, by the way, right? You serve the town of Ammon, but you don't have to build the infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, you think it through. It's really like a no-brainer. If the CFO of Verizon go into this, why he's not jumping at it, I have no idea. Because he could serve Ammon, Idaho with FiOS without spending a penny on construction. Right? He's already invested billions in the back end of FiOS. So he doesn't have to spend another penny on that because it's already working. All he has to do is lease VLANs from Ammon. And, you know, I mean, it's that easy.
I guess to dig into Ammon a little bit, is that it's a fascinating example. Like compared to the Europe and the PE, was it a PE funded initiative or was it a community funded initiative?
Yeah, so the city built the backbone for the network with reserves from the water department. And that was about $1.2 million for the initial backbone. And then they used a local improvement district model, which is the only model available to them in Idaho. And so when a subscriber signs up, they're signing up acknowledging this is an improvement to my property and I'm responsible for my connection. So this is like my water connection. This is like my sewer connection. Their obligation is to the infrastructure. It's not
Got it.
ISP or to an ongoing M&O contract. It's just to the infrastructure, which turns out to be about $21 of the 47 total.
This will kind of date me, I guess, but I remember, I'm sure all of you can remember the whole Lifeline tax, right?
Yep.
Like from the telcos, right? It's the, which ultimately changed to getting broadband, but it's kind of that, right? I mean, they're paying for, essentially the infrastructure is the Lifeline, and it is the broadband connection, right?
So far, they've done it opt-in, so it's voluntary. I mean, the least expensive path is to mandate it for everybody. The city leaders didn't feel like there was unified support for that, so they did an opt-in local improvement district, and they've ended up with 65% take rates, so they've got substantial take rates.
Wow.
But it's not nobody's forced to participate.
Rio Blanco County in rural Northwest Colorado is a similar story. They're doing a symmetric gig on their fiber network. I think it's $65 a month. They have 3 provider options on their network. The county provides the infrastructure and has built out the infrastructure, and they have 3 local ISPs. None of the national ISPs have really been interested in coming on the networks and engaging. Greg, to your point, I don't know why Verizon and all these other providers aren't coming on these smaller networks, but it's an amazing opportunity. They have a small 4-year college in the town of Rangeley, and one of the things that this college is pitching to prospective students, or they were pre-COVID-19. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they guaranteed a gig to every dormer.
Wow. So we've talked about what it is. We've talked about some examples of, obviously, Greg mentioned multiple places in Europe that's invested significantly, and I would agree. I don't think there's any PE company in the world that is not in it to make a profit. And then with the examples here in one example here in the US, or 2, I guess. But so why hasn't it taken off?
Yeah, I mean, like in the U.S. specifically, I mean, if you're telling me that the PEs have gotten behind it in a major multi-billion-dollar way in Europe, they typically, repeat their model, right? Rinse and repeat everywhere else. So why is that not happening? And I think the other thing that's really interesting, and Nate just said it too, is that with Rio Blanco, why are none of the larger ISPs wanting to jump on that? It seems like a no-brainer. In Jeff's backyard, Utopia Fiber is another muni-based fiber solution across multiple municipalities that's done probably one of the largest networks that I know of that's open access. And I think they have 11 different providers, and I'm looking at their website right now. I've never heard of any of them, and they're obviously growing leaps and bounds. What's going on, guys? Why are we Americans not all over this? I mean, this group. What's going on?
The dial-up. Remember all the companies, the dial-up, the ISPs? They were everywhere, right? So, my background, in addition to telecom, broadband is innovation. That's, my MBA is in innovation management. What's that worth? But so I look at things like that, and one of the things I've learned when I look at this was, I came up with the phrase, I call it the power of the incumbents, or the power of incumbency. And it applies to any industry. I was doing some work with some ocean tech people locally, and this industry moves so slow. And I'm like, no, every big industry moves slow because the dominant players like being the dominant players. Why do they want the game to change? They own the game, right? So I think in the US, what you're facing is just a disinformation campaign around 5G, which has gone on long enough, right? It's a 15-year hype cycle, folks. And so you have the incumbent spending, Verizon and AT&T spend $1 billion each a year of marketing. Comcast and Charter, Spectrum, they just have monopolies about 67, 80% of the country. And they're powerful. right? They pay. I mean, you know the game, right? I have a thing. Years ago, I said all local loops are local, and I meant technology. You know, this neighborhood for DSL, this neighborhood for GPON. But now, and then Tip O'Neill once said all local. Oh, sorry, all politics. So if A equals B and B equals C, then all local loops are political. Sadly, that's true.
So you guys are obviously looking.
Until they play ball, they own the game.
So is an opportunity then, guys, that there's an opportunity in a lot of these rural communities? I mean, obviously this sounds like it could work in a large metro, but obviously, you know, depending on who you listen to, there's anywhere from 15 to 40 million Americans that lack adequate broadband. So it is, I guess, a potential catalyst, right? Being able to partner with, you know, folks like Nate, who's solved the middle mile problem, you know, across many communities, because you've got to solve that first, right? So now they've got 100 gig available to the community, but now the community needs potentially help to take that next step. So is rural America potentially a catalyst for getting more open access, I guess, to start gaining more traction?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my answer. So Ammon went live at the end of 2016. And so in 2017, we started business development. And we started it at the point Ammon went live, all we had was that capability to dynamically switch your ISP. I would say Ammon today has 30% of the technology they will have 12 months from now. So there's a bunch of technology that will be unleashed over the next year, which will be more transformative than what we've done in Ammon. But on the business development side, so you think about the cycle. If you're working just with cities, it takes 2 to 3 years just the sales cycle. And that's to get them to start their feasibility report. And then you've got a year working on their feasibility report. And then you've got to build the network. And you may do that in 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the size of the network. So what we're seeing now, we've got 2 cities in Idaho under construction, copying the Ammon model. We've got a city in the Midwest, it's a county actually, in a county of 200,000, copying the Ammon model. And we've got a project in California that will start as a smaller project and then grow to a countywide project. So there's 4 that are actually under construction. And then there's about 15 to 16 that are in the feasibility phase of the process. But you've got to sort of walk down the timeline in terms of how long this process takes. The thing that Greg has explored is, you know, the cities take 2 to 3 years on the sales cycle. Why don't we just skip that part, bring in capital, and start building networks? And that's the piece. Greg's been hammering at that. And I've spent the last year working on that same problem. If we can align capital with infrastructure projects, then I think you will see a very rapid transformation toward open access. If not, if it stays at the municipal level, it's going to be a slower slog. And it's going to happen regionally where people see the impact and you start to see it bubbling up regionally.
Yeah,
Well, let's shift gears a little bit, though. I guess, given that, and I think obviously we're all in the broadband and technology space, there's a lot. I mean, I think Brian mentioned earlier, Jeff mentioned, you know, obviously fiber is fiber. Like there's really no comparison of what you can deliver with fiber versus other technologies. But that being said, there's Starlink from, you know, Elon Musk, there's Airband, there's Terragraph from Facebook. There's all these new technologies that are basically looking and building solutions that yes, they have to have the infrastructure, but they are changing the model of delivering broadband in rural and especially in urban areas. So how do these new technologies change the open access model, or does it?
It's all the above. When you get to rural, it's whatever works, right? You know, I have this quip where, you know, broadband is broken in the cities, it's broken in suburbia, right? It's not broken in rural, it's never been fixed, right? Rural telephony never worked. It was subsidized. So why do you think broadband's going to work? I mean, really, like, so rural is a special case, especially like rural, right? I don't know if anyone can solve that. So it's whatever works. Whether you want to float blimps over there, or balloons, or the satellite stuff, great. But at the end of the day, it's it's fiber to some antenna, right? It's going to be that antenna could be a Wi-Fi router, or it could be a 5G tower or 6G, in 20 years, or it could be some fixed wireless for that farm down the way. So it's whatever works once you get further and further away from even little towns, right? So all the technology is great. The more the merrier.
There's a lot of misinformation on what Elon Musk is doing, but if you read what they're saying, so I read a report last week that was information from the company, and they mentioned 32 milliseconds of latency. And so to me, and they even say in there, it's a solution for unserved and underserved areas. So, they did in one test, they got up to 100 megabits, but the sampling of what they're getting is in the 16 to 40 megabits per second. So, I think it's a fantastic, I'm working with a county in Arizona, and parts of that county are so rural. I told the county, you guys should be looking at what Elon Musk is doing. It's not a solution for Maricopa County in Phoenix, but it may be a fantastic solution for people that are 200 miles from Phoenix.
I guess I'm just wondering, does it make from a financial model perspective, again, if you use, Wi-Fi 6, you use, and obviously, and let's put aside the Starlink stuff, but like more here, or even again, the Telegraph stuff that's using wireless or even local WISPs, there is a way, it's the avoiding of the ripping up a street and putting in fiber, right? Like it is changing the dynamic of that. Now, obviously you have to have backhaul, like you can't get the speed unless you have the backhaul. But from a financial model, does it make it more appealing to someone to invest in an open access if a part of that network can be wireless?
Think about what you're investing. Sorry, Jeff. What are they investing in? Right? They're not investing in. They're investing in an asset, right? And so that's why I like dark fiber versus lit fiber. Both have a role, and you can do both simultaneously. But investors, they want to know what they're investing in, right? So dark fiber is very akin to a real estate investment trust. It really is just a dark fiber. It's you can legally treat it as a real estate. So now the risk profile, another buzzword, is better understood. And so, they're investing in a network. They're not, they're investing in a company that offers open access. That's a different level of investment, right? That's not an infrastructure investment. We haven't really talked about that. It's important what you call this. If you call it broadband or you call it internet access, that's one thing. But at the end of the day, it's infrastructure. And I tell cities all over, just if you don't call me ever again, use the word infrastructure. Never use the word broadband again.
So we're saying open access has done a poor job of marketing, is what you're saying.
There's so many-
Just saying, like, right? I mean, it's like a lot of things. If people don't get it,
everyone uses the term, you're right, for different things. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of middle miles open access.
Yeah, I mean, the open access is the biggest nightmare for the incumbent. The model they least want to see deployed because it will commoditize what they do.
And they're not participating in these examples we've been talking about.
They're not participating because they don't want to see it happen. And what we haven't talked about, so when we talk about exposing the service provider to competition and innovation as our definition of open access, what happens when you expose? So the ISP up until now has been insulated from innovation. Verizon, AT&T, all of these guys, there's no outside threat of innovation because they control the infrastructure. So when you expose the service provider to innovation, what is it about the ISP that can't be automated? I mean, let's think about what they do. They give you backhaul. So that's really partnering generally, or it's their backhaul. They give you an IP address. Right now they take care of infrastructure, but if you pull the infrastructure away from them, they may do customer service, but what we're finding out in Ammon is it's basically a lights out operation for the ISP. And so the question is, when you expose the ISP to innovation, what's going to happen? And I think we're going to get an answer to that question over the next 2 years. And I think you're going to see, because of these automation technologies, you're going to see a rethinking and a redefinition of the role of an ISP and the way they play in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that you're right, Jeff. The commodity, no ISP wants to see the commoditization of what they do. I mean, it takes the margin out of it for them, and then they have to compete on a different level, and they have to find new ways to differentiate their product suite. I've worked with a number of communities, and they're perfectly fine working with local ISPs in an open access model, but they've put RFPs out because they wanted to pursue an open access model, and they did a national search for those ISPs. And when they looked at the list of ISPs who are available, and Jeff, certainly, you look at the model out at Utopia, and you've never heard of some of these ISPs. For a municipality that's concerned about quality of service and what is the public's impression of broadband, and infrastructure versus broadband versus content, they don't want to have to worry about, oh, well, I'm paying $22 a month, but now I'm getting crappy service. So I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to talk to I'm going to call my town council person, or I'm going to call the mayor and complain about this service provider. And they kind of don't want that headache. So they want the process to be seamless. So a lot of what I've seen is they'll put one service provider in as a primary service provider to at least launch the service. And but the understanding is after 18 months, they will open the network up to additional service providers if service providers are interested in coming on the network. So it's a bit of that governance challenge as well, and certainly no municipality. My pup just joined me. No municipality wants to get a black eye with their broadband project, because the public, when a municipality or a county does a broadband project, the general public has a hard time, I believe, comprehending the difference between infrastructure and service provider content and services.
So that's a good shift and it's hard to believe we've almost been talking for an hour, but we can probably talk about this all day. Let's talk about the future though. Let's talk about, Nate, to your point, I mean, clearly when you're dealing with, and this probably goes with a lot of things in life, like when things are complicated, it's hard to dumb it down. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's hard just to simplify concepts, especially if you're not in the business. I mean, we all live and breathe in the technology space. So we like this stuff. We like to read about it. We like to talk about it. What does the future look like for open access? And I guess maybe for each, what can we do to try to encourage it at our different perspectives? Because I joked earlier about the bad marketing, but I mean, part of it is seem like it's it's not a clear message, right? And the municipalities, obviously, they're funded by communities, so it's risky. PEs they want to make a profit. So how do we, maybe what does the future look like, and how can we all help to try to encourage a model that, by all accounts, is a really good model? Maybe Greg or Jeff to start.
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, it is a really good model. Funny, when I was doing this, if you ever see the movie The Big Short, it's like right? No, sure. It's like we all knew we were right. Right? I mean, it's just like you look at the model. I've run numbers. These PE guys made me crunch numbers that I never knew were there. Because I'm not a finance guy, I'm the first to admit. But I was crunching numbers and doing financial models. It's like, oh my God, like Gordon Gekko. But it was like living the movie The Big Short, because the numbers just worked like a charm. And one of the risks that I felt when I did this was that you could make too much money, because take Ammon, like once you build it, and now you're the fiber guy for everyone, by the way. You're the 5G fiber guy, you're the enterprise fiber guy, you're the local government fiber guy. You're the fiber guy because you're the one, you were smart and you deployed a ton of fiber to every possible location, right? So, what the future is going to be like, this industry moves slow, right? Because it is infrastructure, as Jeff alluded to. You pull the trigger, let's go do it. 5 years goes by, right? And the way these towns, and they drive me crazy and they're wasting their money and time, they do a survey, that's a year. Some of these towns around here, Jeff knows them, they have to get a vote to spend $20K to do a survey, right? That takes a year.
So but to that point, how do you speed that up? Because the future, if it takes 5 years to do something, that's a long time. And
what I found after every time someone said no or you're an idiot, I kept a list. And they became challenges. I'm going to overcome these challenges, right? You call me an idiot. Yeah. So anyway, I did have a list. I had 10. And then I came up with the first one, and I didn't want to remember them, so I called it Challenge Zero. And I can show you my slides. So Challenge Zero was the community, right? As you alluded to, it was like, and I've talked to some smart people just in my town at kids' games or in town, whatever. No one knows they have a broadband problem. So how are they going to and then you say, well, the town's going to do it. And people say, whoa, the town? The local government? No way, they can't even fill the potholes. I don't want them to be the ISP. So there's a lot of the community just doesn't get it. They don't understand broadband. They don't understand internet. They don't understand the cloud. They just don't understand it. It's not because they're dumb. It's just because they're not techies, right? So the number one thing to get this moving is to get the community. And I'm not talking like grassroots, it's not a political game. It's just,
Nate's dying here. He's like,
oh my gosh. Yeah, my dog's dying for attention.
I thought you were dying about the community comments.
Oh, no, Greg, you're absolutely on target. I mean, it takes a long time to pull a community together and to pull the interests together. Because you're right. I talked to to people in multiple communities, and they really don't know that they have you don't know you have a broadband problem until you've been sensitized to it. But then it takes time to bring that community together, and then to build enough political will to be able to drive a project forward and raise that capital. And then once it happens, then you can't build it fast enough.
Yeah. It's the hurry up and wait.
Right.
There's a lot of pushback with private equity, by the way. Private equity has baggage too. So people they look at what I found around New England and some of the smaller communities. There was a negative feeling about out-of-state investors. Because it is community infrastructure, right? It's critical community infrastructure. So it's like, wow, another big thing was you're going to sell it to Comcast. The private equity is not, the answer, because they have challenges too, right? Because it is a tough game. I gets back to the community education and the incumbents. If the incumbents, sadly enough, if they don't want to play ball, they have the power to not make this happen.
They also had the power to knock Brian off of the Zoom call. So they saw we were talking about this stuff, and they're like, bam, he's out. They just knocked him right off. He's
Hey,
trying to get
anyone
back
who
in.
lights the fire but can monitor every packet.
I know, right? He's like, he's
Yeah.
talking the service providers. So,
Light
Jeff,
it.
what do you think?
So two things. One, if states or the federal government wanted to solve the broadband problem, all they would have to do, they wouldn't even have to give grant money. If they would just give low interest loans to real estate developers, but the real estate's fiber. So if they make low interest loans available to developers, project developers like Greg. So if I could give the money to Greg to develop all of North Boston, he would have that done over the next 7 years. So, you know, the states really could, just by providing loans, not grants, but just low interest loans, they could fix this problem. Our feeling on the future, and we're really interested, so we'll roll this out over the next year. We've got a smart device that goes at the home that allows the intelligence to happen in our network. So the ability to switch your ISP on demand is there because, and this is how I met Greg, he was doing a marketing project for the company that provided that gateway that goes at the home, which is really a mini PC. That same gateway will allow us to do virtualization to the premise. And so what that means is that we will be able to do automated private networks on demand at layer 2. So without getting too much in the weeds, the internet's at layer 3. We're going to be able to do true private networks. We're doing it today. It just doesn't have the full automation. And we basically had to build our own operating system on that gateway because the operating system we were using didn't enable the automation. That operating system is now deployed in Ammon. And so we're now in a position to do this full automation at layer 2. So what that means is if a teacher wants to do virtual classroom over a private network, they'll be able to stand that up literally in 30 seconds.
Wow.
It will be in a private network. It won't be across the public internet. So the importance of that, there's privacy and security implications, but there's also local resilience because the packets are not leaving the city. We're addressing point to point. And so you're not going to, if you're in Greeley, you're not going to go out to Denver and then back to Greeley across the public internet. You're going to stay in Greeley. And so you're going to build this locally resilient network that won't be taken down if there's some event with the middle mile connection. The importance of that, though, is we believe once the capability is there, so once we'll be able to do this in Ammon on demand, I'm going to say in the next 6 to 9 months. We're doing it today. We've got people using them today, but the automation will be real time in the next 6 to 9 months. So what that means is you'll be able to do telemedicine in private networks. You'll be able to do education networks, public safety networks, whatever. There's not a limit because they're software networks.
Yeah.
So our belief is that once we move the ball in terms of what is possible, we'll change it from a nice to have and a luxury to an essential. Meaning, if we can increase security, if we can improve local resilience, if we can do new things with public safety, then we're going to move the ball in terms of what will be expected from consumers. And a lot of the 5G hype is around this capability, but they want to monetize that capability. And in our platform, those layer 2 networks are free. So once you're connected on the infrastructure layer, it's built in and it's included. So the two of you, Brian and Nick, you guys could send large emails, 50 meg, 100 meg emails back and forth if you're on one of these networks locally without going out across the public internet. So part of what I'm really interested in as far as the future goes is what's going to happen as we expose the ISP to innovation, and what will the subsequent impact on price be, but also what's going to happen as these on-demand layer 2 private networks are real in an open access environment.
Let me just add one point on that where what Jeff said is spot on, where That's in the lit model again, where the wholesaler is the VLANs are us. He's wholesaling VLANs, right, as opposed to the dark fiber. So one of the important things to realize that when you think of broadband, don't make it synonymous with internet access, right? That's what Comcast wants you to believe, that broadband and internet access are one and the same. They're separate. Internet access is just one service that runs on the open access fiber network. As Jeff alluded to, with that telemedicine, teleeducation, all these local networks or VLANs, those are layer 2 services, right? Those are broadband services. They're not internet services because they're layer 2, but they are broadband services. So that's the beauty of it. I would charge, by the way. I mean, you might throw a few in for free, but there's nothing wrong with making money, right?
Yeah.
You can make it $1, right?
That's a business model.
You want a private book club, it costs you $1.
Yeah.
An hour per gig.
Business model question.
You don't have to gouge people, right? Fair record.
Oh, that's great, and you're absolutely right, because trying to explain to people who aren't internet people, in my model, I call that transport and bandwidth.
Yeah.
And trying to explain to people what transport is, and that you can only you don't need, and that they're two separate things.
Yep.
And you can buy them separate. You can't buy it separately from my network if you're buying transport today. But you could have your choice of bandwidth providers on the network. And Jeff, that's where this device that you're coming up with, I see as a win-win, because today communities are doing direct over-the-air broadcast for council meetings, for participating in, for viewing local sporting events. If you can do point-to-point, that's just an extraordinary, that takes this commodity, that takes this open access infrastructure that we're talking about, and it opens it up for the whole community. So it creates this another community online that's not restricted to some platform that you're sharing texts and videos just because the name of your community is on that platform.
And think of this, what Jeff's can do, what his technology can do, where like today, if I want to get to any website, Amazon, whatever, I go from my house through coax, I go down to Boston, and then I interconnect at some carrier hotel, but it's an internet service. So it's me, Comcast, Amazon at layer 3. Where with Jeff, there's no reason that Amazon or any web company, I couldn't serve me at layer 2. And you think of that, it belittles, it weakens the economic strength of the ISP. Hence, that's the reason the incumbent ISPs don't want to change the game. Because if the internet is just one of your VLANs, right? You have a direct connection with Amazon, you have a direct connection with Apple, direct connection with Google, a direct meaning layer 2, and you have a direct connection to Comcast internet. Well, that value of that Comcast internet pipe is a heck of a lot less than it was when everything was going through that pipe. Yep. That's economic disruption, right? That's disruptive innovation, right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's really interesting what's happening right now. We're so focused on obviously trying to get more access to more people, and where Jeff, is going is obviously creating even more and more value. And I think what's happening right now is, we've had these individual kind of siloed pillars trying to solve these problems, right? You've had folks that care about internet access, you have people that care about telehealth, you have people that care about education, and those are all been somewhat separate fronts. And I think what's exciting right now that, don't waste a good crisis, as some folks would say. And with the pandemic, we're now having tons of challenges happening with obviously education, right? And we're getting so many calls from schools needing help, calling our company, calling employees, that are just connected to these various communities. And if I feel like when we've looked at this problem, we always talk about the cost of putting the fiber in. And if you really think about it, the cost for putting the fiber in actually goes down tremendously when we start to solve all of these problems together. So we work with a group called Prime Health, which is an organization focused on telehealth innovation. And there's amazing innovation happening in telehealth, but it all falls on its face, of course, if you don't have a connection. But what we've seen just in at least Colorado is that we've been able to keep, the rate of folks being in hospitals associated with COVID. We've been able to deal with that so well because the state rolled out connectivity options, right, for telehealth. So folks that, would normally go in didn't have to, but they still got the care. So right in the metro. And then so that obviously helped us deal with this. So if we can all come together, I think there's the future is quite bright in a lot of ways. There's not only new technology options for connectivity, but you're having a force come together. And if the force can come together, come on, we decided to go build highways. Highways were a hell of a lot more expensive than building conduit, right? In these communities, I really think we're getting close to solving this problem, and we need more federal funding, state funding. We need more private funding, right? And I think you're going to see, and the whole reason we do the Beer and Broadband series is bringing these ideas together, because there's not a one size fits all, right? I think open access is super cool. And why we wanted to have the diverse group today is because we're actually solving it from two different areas, right? Nate's solving it from a very specific point of view, first making sure we can even get the access to these rural communities. And then obviously Jeff and Greg are really looking at a model that can completely change the entire industry, right? So I think as we can get smarter about simplifying this message, right, to city, state, government, and just consumers, and the people that obviously have the purse strings on capital, I think our future is amazingly bright.
Yeah,
I agree.
And
I'd love to see the federal funding and the state stop thinking in terms of grants, just do low interest loans, they get their money back, and everybody gets fiber. If we could switch the mentality to this grant giving money away, then I think the barriers to achieving that are a lot lower.
I would totally agree with you on that. Well, it's just like when we first put in fiber and we put 12 strands to do, an inter office connect. We thought that was all we were going to need. It's like, build more. You're going to benefit from it, right? You're right, Greg. It is. I think it's one of the most amazing assets you could possibly have. And that's why I still am somewhat dumbfounded that the PE money hasn't come into this quicker in the US.
There's still risk associated with it in their mind, right? Because you do need take rate, you do have all that municipal paperwork.
totally, it's poor marketing.
I agree with Nick.
All right, guys, we're at the top of the hour. We've actually, I've personally learned a lot. One, open access clearly is a model that can work. Two, I think this is a really important point that I think I missed, at least, and in reading some of these articles and even how people cover it, I think that what it can do for innovation is actually huge. I think that's a big a value proposition, and one that, I think to the point, how service providers and communities think, like, and all joking aside, I do think it is a perception issue, right? It is, you have to get people to believe. And when Brian was talking about all the different things that happen and can be supported by broadband, if people don't believe in it, and Nate obviously deals with communities, it's hard to move the ball forward. So I think, obviously lots of great stuff about open access, and I'm hoping we can continue to have these conversations. I want to thank Greg, Nate, Jeff, and Brian, obviously, for attending and being outstanding panelists for open access. We'll do one last kind of parting thought, if you have anything that you want to share with the listeners, and then we will close it out and continue to, at least for Nate and Brian and I, continue to enjoy our beer. So kind of parting thought from, we'll go around the room, start with Greg.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys. like I said, I was enamored with the model just because it solved a lot of problems. I still think it does. The industry does move slow because, again, this is infrastructure. This isn't, equipment that you toss out in 2 years of software. We upgrade it every week. This is civic infrastructure. The model works. Just pull it. Just do it. I mean,
Just
don't
do
waste
it.
time on surveys. Don't waste
Nike.
time on feasibility studies. It works. Start building.
Better marketing right there. Just
Yeah.
do it.
Just do it. Jeff?
Yeah, it is a matter of we've got to hit a critical mass. Fast Company did an article in October. We had nothing to do with this in terms of marketing. And the title of the article was "The Best Fiber Optic Network in America is in a City You've Never Heard of." And I think as more cities replicate what Ammon's done, then we're going to see a snowballing of this model moving forward.
Nate?
I'm going to go with just do it. Yeah, it was great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And Mr. Hollister?
Yeah, no, I so enjoy these. I love coming together and sharing our stories and being able to provide value to the audience. And I think you're right. That article said it all. That was I remember seeing that article, Jeff. And it's amazing that in some of these rural areas now they have some of the very best networks in the world now. And I think that is going to continue to gain traction. And I think it is all about obviously critical mass. And I think we're making momentum. We're building, right? And I think the foundation of all these conversations is obviously laying out the right fiber network, engineering it properly. And that's obviously what we can help with. So I appreciate everyone's time today, and look forward to speaking with all of you soon again.
And for future broadband or beer and broadband episodes, you can visit bonfire-ec.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.